Let's start with this. Out of 104 legislators, I'm probably the only one who's going to come out and do a little map preview like this. So let's talk about what makes me a little bit unique. You guys are going to have to weigh in as to whether or not you can hear me over the school kids. We just keep going?
You're fine. Yeah, you're good. The mics aren't that sensitive.
Okay. So many of you will remember that when we did congressional redistricting, even though I was at the time a member of the majority party, I voted against the congressional maps. And I voted against the congressional maps specifically because I believed that they were drawn in such a way as to politically disadvantage a party. And I don't think that that's appropriate. I don't think that that is, I didn't find that acceptable. So I voted no. The other thing that makes me kind of unique in the legislature right now is that I am the only current legislator in the state of Utah that does not belong to one of the two legacy parties. So I have a map that I actually drew during redistricting as a Republican that is compliant with all of the orders under Proposition 4 that actually focuses on compactness and keeping counties together while absolutely, completely ignoring voter registration and voting patterns. This is entirely based mathematically on compactness and, more importantly, voter totals. Not voting patterns, but registered voters. So one of the things that you'll notice is that adherence to federal law is the first and primary concern. Now, that means numbers have to equal. You cannot have 7 people in one district and 1 million people in another and still have them have an equal weight in their vote. So the numbers have to be even. The numbers have to be based on the US population, and there cannot be any racial or demographic decision-making in how you draw your lines. So this was drawn on the basic premise that there are 4 major population counties that must split. So where do you split them? I would argue that the most fair way to do it is to just split straight down I-15. Most people have no idea where their municipal boundaries are. Everyone knows where I-15 is. And this funny thing happens. If you split the Wasatch Front down I-15 while keeping all other counties intact, you actually come pretty darn close to 50-50. Now, one of these maps actually has the numerics. So again, with the first primary principle being adherence to law, you have to get your numbers roughly equal. So as you can see, we're within 25 people. Not 2.5%, but 25 human beings. One district has 25 people more. So to make that happen, you've got to balance the population centers. And the fact of the matter is, Salt Lake is the population center. People can say it's unfair, but the reality is, when you look at what came forward from the Independent Redistricting Commission, if you make your hometown the center of the universe, you inappropriately, utterly disadvantage the entire rest of the state. So let's just go through real quick. As you can see, this does follow law, which is the most important thing. Minimizes divisions of municipalities and counties across multiple districts. There are 29 counties. 25 of them have no splits. Making districts geographically compact. Now, I hope that you can agree just from eyeballing that these are not compact. When you prioritize your town, you deprioritize and disadvantage everyone else's town. So from a mathematical standpoint, this is as compact as 4 equal population centers can be on a Utah map. I don't believe that it is possible to come up with a more compact map, but I would love someone to prove me wrong. So if somebody wants to go in and look at the shapefile and try and find a way to make it more compact, that's a win for me. Ensuring districts are contiguous and allow ease of transportation throughout the district. Some people don't realize that there is a massive split that creates the county boundary for San Juan County. So if your district puts San Juan in with St. George, you actually have to drop down into Arizona to get to the rest of your district. Now, when you look at this one that keeps Salt Lake City intact, most people don't know that the city boundaries go from Summit County all the way on the Davis County boundary, all the way to the Tooele boundary. So if you keep that intact, then you would actually force people to have to drive through a different district to get to the rest of their district. So as you can see, by focusing on traversability down I-15, this ensures districts are contiguous and allows ease of transportation through the district. Preserving traditional neighborhoods and communities of interest. This one is one that is debatable because, as I mentioned, I didn't want to go through and say, I'm going to keep this city, but I'm going to cut that city. I let the mathematical numbers and population fall where they may. So for this particular case, we end up, if you zoom in, we end up with Murray and Midvale actually being the center of population for the state. So if you prioritize keeping the boundaries of Midvale and the boundaries of Murray in the same district, what you'd end up with is Midvale would come down here across I-15, Murray would come this way across I-15. Is that better? I don't know. I think people in Murray and Midvale could probably have that conversation about whether or not they have more in common east or west of I-15 or crossing I-15 in their own neighborhood. Again, this is something that somebody else could look at the shapefile and try and make those arguments. But making those changes means that we no longer have straight lines. And I believe that straight lines is probably the best indication that we're not looking at voter patterns. We're trying to have a map that makes sense. Following natural and geographic boundaries, barriers, and features, again, I would highlight the lack of understanding of San Juan and southern Utah. Maximizing agreement of boundaries between different types of districts. I'll tell you why that is the one area that I don't believe I can comply with without damaging all of the other more important priorities. Because the other types of districts were drawn in a very political, and I would argue, not great manner. So rather than trying to make a clean, non-partisan, non-political map comply with, look, let's just use the word, okay? You look at the legislative district maps, they're pretty gerrymandered. They are specifically drawn in a way to get the outcome that they want. This map is not. So if I try and make this fit to gerrymandered maps, then it will look gerrymandered. So that is why I believe this map best and better represents the interests of the voting populace, better complies with Proposition 4 than the maps from the Independent Redistricting Commission.
Are you submitting these to the legislature?
Yes, I do intend to present this as a substitute bill. And, you know, if there's enough public support, maybe some legislators will listen. But there you go.
Have you spoken right now, like presently, to either the majority or minority caucuses about those maps? And do you think that they would buy in on it, or some of them?
It's hard to say, and I certainly don't intend to speak for any other legislator.
Sure.
I'm going to do the best that I can, and I believe that this map represents the best that I can do, and I would really like to see if there is a way to improve on this map. My concern is I don't want any political party trying to use redistricting to generate an advantage for their person. I believe that when you have more competitive areas, then you necessarily get more responsive candidates. Now, I do real quick want to invite, Phil, do you want to just come up and say a couple of things? And I'll just stand next to you, Hopefully that's good enough for your mics. We don't have to trade off.
Yeah, that's right.
Stands close.
Okay,
Stand
Phil,
close-
will you
stand close
Phil,
by, yeah.
will you just introduce yourself real quick for folks who don't know?
Yeah, sure. My name's Phil Boileau. I'm the communications director for the Forward Party of Utah. And so we're here today to support Senator Thatcher as our legislator. We are not necessarily making a comment that all members of the Forward Party or anybody in the independent space should necessarily drop what they're doing, drop their other opinions, and rush to the support of this map. What we want to do is open a dialogue that we feel is productive. That's our role as a political party,
Right.
to have the conversation.
Right, and to that end, you've got the website.
That's right. We will be putting a website up on the utahforwardparty.org website. We'll be adding one where we can sort of facilitate this conversation. And then we will also be providing an email address so that anybody in the community can provide comments and support in line with what Senator Thatcher was saying.
Or challenge.
Or challenge, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, we want criticism. We want constructive feedback. We want tweaks. We want, a completely different perspective. We want to be another place where the people of Utah can,
Sure.
have participate in this.
Productive conversation. So speaking only for myself, I want to be clear that the Forward Party has not met to publicly support or endorse the map. They're here to support me. And so, I look forward to hearing feedback on how we could make this map better, or if there are huge glaring things that I've missed. What I'm not interested in is I'm not really interested in partisan arguing that I didn't gerrymander or cheat or use data to make the maps do something that is beneficial to them. Because I think, again, if you take a look at how we used I-15 as the delineating mark and how we used population balance as the primary concern and compactness, I hope that you can look at that and see a map that was not based on any voting patterns or voter registration or anything like that. We're just trying to be as fair as possible to as many as possible. So that's all I got. I'm happy to answer any more specific questions.
They can comment on the Forward Party of Utah's website. Just so
That's
I-
correct.
That is
It's
correct.
utahforwardparty.org. I will follow up with information, and we'll have that within a couple hours ago.
Thank
We
you.
will also, by the way, be posting the 3 maps submitted by the original Independent Redistricting Commission, so that all the information is there. We're also I'll try to use my tech skills to figure out how to make the files public. Although I have to say, I was poking around in it. The state legislator has a pretty good website where you can log into ArcGIS and click around in these things for yourself. It doesn't take a long time to learn.
Actually, do you know what? There's one thing I didn't mention that I think people are going to have questions. I keep talking about how straight the lines are, and the reality is, again, the first and foremost principle has to be equality and balance of population. So you can't just do completely straight lines and have the numbers add up. So if you look, I actually did a zoom in of where it gets messy, okay? So going from here, where you see that all the rural areas are kept completely within their county boundaries, we cut Utah County, we cut Salt Lake County, we cut Weber-Davis in half. So each district will end up having 3 separate and unique parts. Not equal in population, but 3 separate unique parts. They'll each have Salt Lake County, they'll each have a county of the second class, whether it's Weber-Davis or Utah County, and they'll each have a rural component. So what you'll see here is as we zoom in on the Wasatch Front, that's where you'll start to see some of the lines aren't completely straight. Now, those of you who understand redistricting have probably already figured out that that's because you have to make the numbers add up. So you have to, because District 1 has less population in Tooele and Box Elder than what you have in the other more populous areas, it actually has to pick up some population. So I've tried to make it as close to center as possible. I've tried to make it make as much sense as possible, and I've tried to keep the lines as straight as possible. But when you look and you see that little corner, that's like 113 people. So I actually couldn't finish this box without unbalancing the numbers. So if you've never played with the software, I encourage you to, because you'll go in and you'll say, oh, now I see why that has a weird hook, because that's how the precincts are drawn.
So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about your map that you're proposing. Is there still a fundamental problem in splitting Salt Lake County? Your map still splits Salt Lake County.
So that is, I think, the question that most people are going to ask. If they believe Salt Lake County is the center of the universe, then they can't understand why their neighborhood is the one that splits. Why can't you split anyone else? And it comes down to math, because that's where all the people are. So if you can see here on this map, if you keep Salt Lake together, you necessarily, again, geographically traversable. I don't know how familiar you are with Rich and Cache, but it's not ideal. It looks like it is if you don't understand how mountain ranges drop. So if you're looking at ease of transport, again, this puts St. George in with San Juan. And that is really not ideal.
So it comes down to math.
Yes, it splits Salt Lake, but not because it's Salt Lake, because that's where the population is.
Gotcha. And then put on your political prognosticating hat. Which districts then, under your version of map, should it ever pass and become law, would be the competitive ones?
Do you know, I think a lot of people could probably predict that better than I can. Mm-hmm. Just going off the top of my head, I personally think that any district that includes Utah County probably going to stay pretty red. The reality is the majority of Utah is red. So with southern Salt Lake County going in with Utah County, I'd say those probably are not going to be competitive districts, but I don't think they're competitive now. Will the Salt Lake City district be competitive because it includes the East Bench and Park City? Maybe, because it also includes the Uinta Basin, which isn't a lot of population. It also includes Cache, which is the sixth biggest county in the state. And it also includes the the eastern half of Weber Davis. And Weber Davis tend to elect Republicans. But think about Davis County Republicans. You tend to get people like Becky Edwards, people like Steve Handy, people like Ray Ward. So I think it probably still leans Republican, but I don't know. I haven't run those numbers, and moreover, I don't want to run those numbers, because the fact of the matter is, if you change your lines and your boundaries based on how you think voting might go, then I believe you necessarily have a political map, and I'm trying to avoid that.
Gotcha.
Was that the longest, most rambling answer you've ever heard? It was pretty bad, right?
So just to kind of clarify, just to like maybe you already answered this kind of, but to restate one more time, like a lot of criticisms that people had with the current map was that it split up Salt Lake County in 4 ways. Can you just say how you feel like your map is different than that, even though it does also split up Salt Lake County?
Yeah, 100%. Because when you look at the other map, I believe, was specifically and deliberately splitting voting populations and voting patterns. In fact, I don't know how many of you saw, but there was actually a report that went through and said that the existing map that was thrown out by the judge separated Democratic voters pretty evenly. But then another more aggressive reporter actually went through and calculated that if you look at votes, because party registration doesn't tell you how votes are going to break. There are a lot of unaffiliateds and a lot of Republicans that sometimes vote blue. So if you look at the number of blue votes cast in 2020, they split almost evenly across the 4 districts that were drawn. So the biggest difference, in my opinion, between this map and what Senate Republicans passed over my objections is you don't see any little hooks and line. You don't see Bountiful being included with St. George. Those maps, in my opinion, are not compact. Those maps, in my opinion, are not drawn to be politically agnostic. And this is.